I can say a few words to get started, but really I think maybe the best way to do this is to walk along, and if somebody wants to ask about a particular picture, we'll talk about a few pictures as we go along. It's much better, I think, if we operate on the basis of questions, because then it's like about what you want to know instead of necessarily what I'm trying to deliver. But I will say a couple of things. That these pictures we first started with, and here comes Lance. I want to introduce Lance right away. This is Lance Metz. He's an industrial historian who's been born and raised and spent his whole life right here in the Lehigh Valley, and has had a long career with the Canal Museum, from which he just retired, where he specialized in the history of canals and canal technology and canal culture. But he is also just one of those many people who love Bethlehem steel, the steel industry, the local history. So I owe it to Lance that the opportunity to get started and to do all this work at Bethlehem.
And I have to say one thing for the Canal Museum, except for the...
Could you step a little closer?
Sure. Except for the first year, which of course was paid by us here at the National Park Service, federal government, the Canal Museum basically paid the cost. Joe provided the expertise and the cameras, and I became the mule. I remember one time we came in at 12 o'clock to shoot number 3 I-House because of the burn and everything. But it was probably the most significant project the Canal Museum has ever done. Being able to work with artists of this caliber, and having the give and take went along with it, and it was just incredible. It was 7 good years.
So anyway, Lance, I'm sure, will add more as we go along, because he is like the encyclopedic,
a walking encyclopedia,
the encyclopedic master of industrial history.
Definitely.
So, but yeah, he was the guy who sort of conceptualized this project before. I mean, I was always interested in it. I was the guy with the camera running around the fence of the outside of the steel mill, saying, "Oh, this is so cool! How do I get in here?" But and I actually tried. I don't know, Steve Donchis is still here.
Oh, he had to leave.
Yeah, he had to go. Okay.
I actually approached the Bethlehem Steel Company before I knew Lance, and I said, "I'm an artist. I love these industrial sites. Can I just come in and take pictures?" And they didn't even respond. It made no sense. Like, why would anybody want to take a picture of this dirty place? But Lance, on the other hand, was a historian, had the kind of more of an academic, it made sense. People understood history. So he made this initial contact in working with, well, it's a long story. We can't go into a lot of detail.
We can't go into a lot of details.
But he set it up, basically, and from there we continued. And from there, even we worked here 7 years. After that, I've done many, many other projects all over the country because of this original contact that we established with Lance and the work we did here. So I owe a lot to this guy.
Well, there's another person too we have to talk about, because he was the 3rd person in the trio, Henry Schmidt.
Right.
Right. Henry was the color photographer, and he shot 35 millimeter of when we were shooting these. Joe was shooting these, and I was walking around with flash. Henry was shooting 35 millimeters. And Joe also shot about 120 4x5 transparencies, and they were of artwork that was in the SGO lobby. And when ArcelorMittal took over, they hauled it all over to Brussels, including the murals and including everything they could get their hands on, including the famous mural and collage at Grace Auditorium, which we were able to record that thanks to Joe, and we just looking and figure we may not need it, we may not have it sometime. Sorry, Joe.
Yeah, so anyway, we spent several summers. The idea was to try to document this place. Although, it's so huge, you could never really get it all. It's impossible. That's one of the problems with, actually, it's one of the good things for you people who didn't go there, because you didn't see what's not here. You know, it's like, it looks like, well, it's pretty big, but those of us who were there, it's like, oh my goodness, it's just overwhelming. So the challenge is to try to take that overwhelming place and make something, you know, comprehensible in a photograph. And that was always the challenge. That was the challenge all the time, is everything seemed to be good, everything seemed to be interesting. What becomes the photograph? So that was, you know, it's a little hard to articulate how that happens, but that was always on my mind. The second thing was, we had very little time. Even though 7 years sounds like a long time, we were only there a few weekdays at a time, a few weeks in the summer. So it was always like, okay, this summer we're going to do one part, and next summer we're going to do another part. And we couldn't really get back. You know, we had to do it. It was like really, if it wasn't done right, it wasn't going to happen. So it was kind of like a pressure there, this kind of opportunity that wasn't going to come again, really. And the main thing was, it was so amazing that as long as we made a good picture and we didn't mess up, in other words, don't mess up the film, don't lose the focus, you know, just technically accomplish it, it's going to be pretty good because it's such a beautiful, you know, a beautiful place.
We had insider help, which would made it all possible. We had John Fielding and Don Young, who were, to a lesser extent, Craig Bartholomew, who were all in Bethlehem Steel at the time and made it possible for us to do it. Steve Donchez originally gave the permission, and then also Gene Riccio, who was head of Beth Ford. So we have to thank those two for giving us permission to come in. But Don and who was the one cop who was with, I'm trying to think of his name, Joe.
Chuck Gallagher.
Chuck Gallagher. He would let us do everything.
They had a guard with us all the time, mostly because they were afraid we'd fall into a vat of steel or, you know, get hurt. So the guard was there to be sure that we didn't get hurt, and once in a while to say, well, you couldn't go there, you know, be sure. But so we had plenty of cooperation. Once we had made that permission happen, we had a lot of cooperation. So, how you doing? So anyway, I think we could maybe talk about a few pictures. And I don't know, does anybody want to
Yes.
ask about one here? Or
Before we leave,
Yeah.
turning point images for you in the project?
Turning point images? Well, almost from it's almost like the first image I ever took, which is not here, for various reasons, was one of the best images I ever took. You know, like this guy John Fielding, who was he was a metallurgist, you know, but loved this place. He took us into this #1 Ford shop, which was completely abandoned. The first shot we made was this like beam of light coming down through the sort of dusty windows into this dark space. And that kind of established, you know, I was not sure it was a turning point, but it was like
it was just a turn.
Established the sense of what this place was, which was this, visually, this kind of deep, huge deep space with these kind of infused with light, you know, in little bits, but really kind of cavernous. So I think that kind of, you know, that's as much of a turning point. But you know, when you go there the first day and you get that one shot and it's so good, it's like, okay, you know, this is it. This is the place to be. So, okay. Any comments, questions?
This picture is taken after this, right?
Actually, it's hard to say which is it. Yeah, it's the same place. No, actually, this is taken before, because we were in there documenting this. I think that was 93, maybe.
93, yeah.
This was later, 95, when it was about to close down, and I went back to get that.
Okay.
There were 7 blast furnaces at Bethlehem, and in the end, they only ran this one blast furnace. Right. 5 remain, 8 through F remain, G and H are long gone.
One thing I could say about all of these is, and they're mostly this way. They're mostly interiors. The inside was more interesting than the outside. You know, you got into these, you know, things that you just couldn't believe. One of the challenges was, like I said, it's dark, so the camera had to be on a tripod all the time. And some of these pictures were extremely long exposures because it's, you need to build up enough light. So these could be anywhere from, you know, a few seconds to a few minute exposures. They also sometimes required light. Lance mentioned he fired the flash, he'd hold the flash. So, for example, this one is lit with a flash, this one's not. That one is lit with a flash in part to throw in some extra light. The camera was big on a tripod, very slow to work. That was one of the limitations, because anything that moved or was happening quickly, I couldn't do. You know, I mean, I could do some if I could anticipate the movement, but anything that moved in some unexpected way, it's like, oh, that's really cool, but there it goes. You know, so.
Another tremendous thing is that they are well documented. You document them, you know what I mean? We got all the dates, we got everything, you know what I mean? And that is in the brochure.
Right.
And that is a plus when you want to know more about this
Right.
kind
One of
of
the sort of dualities or two parts to the same thing is, on the one hand, I just want to make art, which is like, oh, it's beautiful, it's like mysterious, it's, you know, it's, I don't care what it is, if it feels, you know, if it moves me, I want to take the picture. In a documentary sense, you want, well, this machine did that, you know, this was taken exactly this day, this was called this number 3 shot. So, you know, it's a kind of balancing act to have both of those and not have one of them overwhelm the other. If you have too much detail, too much information, it's boring. If you know too much, it's almost, it loses some of that kind of mystery. So there's a sort of sense of wanting to sometimes not know everything. Okay, maybe we could just slowly move down this way. Sorry to have to tell you that better, but some of it was like these big engines we made right there at the same time.
Like the flywheels?
Yeah,
they made them
They
right
had
there.
huge iron foundries. What happened is the engine, the blowing engine is very unique because the last one was type remaining power. The blowing engine was a gas that was symbiote and actually produced as a fuel. Worked with furnace gas and made furnace gas by combustion. So it was invented in Germany in the late 1960s, who sold the American rights to Mesa, and then Mike's Bethlehem produced them. They were all built in the Bethlehem shop. One of the pictures Joe shot was the workers were so proud they had this big sign they had used themselves telling the story of they were symbiotes. And, of course, they are reciprocated masses. About a year before the plant shut down, got the mixtures, furnace gas and natural gas from all blew one of the top. And so that was like some kind of it lasted.
I could point out this one, you know, is kind of iconic. You know, like you think that a steel well has to have sparks. So you know, this was another place where we're watching them forge this thing. This is like they have these big presses. This is a hot piece of metal, and I had to, you know, be relatively far back, but not as far back as you might think. But I was set up to, you know, look at this press, this machine that's back there. And then this guy comes out and he has to burn off some metal. I thought, well, it's right on cue. You know, I'm standing here, and here comes this guy, and I have the camera that can't move and work very fast, and he stands still like that for about 5 minutes, just going. And I thought, he must have known I was coming, you know, and it was just like, it's one of those things that kind of like falls into your lap. So we were lucky that way, you know, many, many times.
What he's doing is, when you pick an ingot, the unsound metal is at the ends. So what you have to do before you put it into the forging press is you have to cut off the unsound metal, which becomes scrap.
one of the things we could comment before we leave these panoramas.
Yeah.
These are images that are several shots put together, which I never printed until recently for this show, because we were, you know, you can print one of these in a darkroom. You cannot print those prints in a darkroom because they're digitally put together, and then, I mean, you could print all the individual shots on regular photo paper, and you could very carefully with a razor blade cut them and plug them together. But what a pain in the neck that is, and I've done that, you know. But with digital, you just scan the negatives, put them together, cut them, you know, chop them, cut them, put them together. So these were images where the place I was standing, you could see so much, but the negative, the lens is just not, it's not a fisheye, you know, the lens is not wide enough. I said, okay, if I just take enough shots, let them all figure, okay, some are going to overlap with others, I'll cut them, put them together. So that's how those got to be. I feel like they're slightly different than the way I normally see that. You know, besides being long, they're just they're not structured the same way at all. They're more almost like a map. It's like a survey, a scan of a place, recording up all the information you see. Okay. Feel free to ask. It's going to work. You know, it's pretty consistent, surprisingly consistent, considering it sounds unimprecise. You know, so anyway. Yeah, this is. We could talk about this one down here for a second. Oh, sorry, you wanted me to have my back to the picture.
No, your face. Yeah, back to me.
My back to the picture, my face to you. Can I go this far down? They're sharp and attractive. This one is another one of those kind of summing up pictures, shows you how big it is. This is another one about, I want to just mention about the printing. This is printed pretty dark, although it's funny. It could be printed lighter. You could see much more in here. But something about as we printed, I helped, David Haas is a friend of mine. He and I printed these together. So we were looking at it, well, this should really feels better darker. But it is also about the light that comes in from above. And one of the appealing things about these old industrial buildings is when they built these, they did not have electric lights that were very powerful. So when somebody was working, they could not see what the work looked like unless they had windows, lots of daylight coming in. So these buildings were built to allow light to come in a way that a modern industrial building, it does not. You know, because the modern industrial building, they want no windows. Like, they're just going to get broken. You know, they got plenty of, you know, high intensity lights. So a modern industrial building has much less interesting light than an old, you know, building that had to rely on natural light. So I think that's one of the things I like.
I'm going to jump in for a second on this photograph, because one of the things that you don't realize until we were doing it is we got ourselves in some places where we had a degree of personal danger. This photograph was taken by climbing up, what was it, the blast furnace.
Yeah, to the top of the blast furnace.
To the top of the blast furnace. You're going up there.
That would be like one of the, you know, this is this. So we're like up there.
And these things have not been maintained. They've been run, but they haven't been maintained in 25 years. So you don't know when you put your hand on a railing, if you put your hand on the step, whether that step is going to be there. Because we found the detritus of, or detritus, whatever it's detritus, I believe, of about a century of workers up there. We have lunch buckets and sledgehammers and.
Yeah, you know, one of the stories was that in one of these, I don't know which, it's not a picture, but one of these very tall spaces we photographed using, they were very helpful. Like I said, the riggers had all this equipment, So they had one of those cherry picker, you know, bucket trucks like you use on phone poles. And they could drive it right into the building. They could like put the camera in and go up high. So we got a few, this shot, it's that one right there that he uses for the poster that he's got there, and that one is shot from this cherry picker truck up in the beams that are holding up. Not this one, but it's up high. You're up in the beams, like to get to the. It's down there for them. At any rate, we're in there, and great, let's go up, you know. And then we move it to another bit. Oh, let's go up here. And you get up there, and they say, "Oh, truck quit. The machine, you know, the motor quit. It conked out." So we're up there, 80 feet up, and with the conked out cherry picker. So, what to do? You know, and of course the riggers, they could go anywhere. They said, "Well, we'll just crawl down the arm," you know. And but then we'd be leaving you up there. So they, fortunately, it was pretty close to the edge. It was only 10, 15 feet from the side of the building where there was a little walkway. So they brought up boards, and we just crawled across the planks to get out of that cherry picker. And they put the you know, the harness on. So they had me all tied up, you know, looped over. So I could get a double. Of course, they just walked across. They didn't care. You know, they didn't. So there was always kind of, it was an adventure. That's one of the things about photography. One of the reasons that a lot of us do photography is just like, well, since I'm a photographer, I get to go to these cool places. Like if I wasn't a photographer, you know, why would I be there? So there's a famous quote from a photographer named Diane Arbus, who's using it in a different way, but she calls the camera her license. Like it's her license to look at people she wouldn't normally look at. So the camera is like this kind of enabling device for some of us to go climb around, look, find stuff. Right? Right, Judith?
That's right.
Okay. Say a little bit about that. This is where we got stuck. It's a little hard to tell that it's that high in there. But anyway, that's not why I wanted to talk about the picture. This is another picture that's sort of pivotal to me in the sense that it tried to show how complicated it was to build something in that day and age to solve the problem that they had, which was to move these giant cannon barrels in and out. So they had to build this building. This is the same building. This is the outside. It's very tall. And they were putting the cannon barrels down into big furnaces to heat them up, to make them stronger, to assemble the part of the process. So they could not put the cannon barrel on the side because it would droop, because it's like hot. So they had to hold them vertically. So this is called a high house. So you can picture, how much did the cannon barrel weigh, Lance?
187,000 tons. 180,000 pounds.
187,000 pounds of steel they're lifting. So, of course, when they're moving it, the building, if they're not careful, the whole building will fall over because it's all going to be like that. So they had to build all this structure, all this like extra reinforced structure to hold that. And it was just kind of fascinating to me, what you had to do to make a thing that was going to make what you were trying to make. The ingenuity, the sort of ingenuity of solving problems with what is a lot of what is interesting. Like a battleship gun. Yeah, they made battleship guns in this place, and they made the armor that went on the. I guess a battleship is. I have a hard time imagining why a battleship doesn't just sink. Of course, it's like a principle of physics, but the armor on a battleship is like this. It's so thick. It's like that thing is so heavy.
Well, there's a principle that saves, and it's called, let me
jump in here, but I'll explain real quick. The all or nothing principle. In other words, when you have a battleship, not every inch of that battleship is covered with armor. The only parts which are covered with armor are the things which have to be covered: the magazine, upholstery machinery, the guns, and the conning tower. The rest of it is just plain sheet steel. Because they found that it was stupid. They used to build battleships where some parts would have Class A armor, the best armor, other parts would have Class C armor. And they found Class C and B armor couldn't stop anything, so they just put, we the Americans invented it, Bethlehem Steel invented it. It's either going to be all of our best armor in this part of the ship because we need it, or it's not going to be there.
So anyway,
There's a battleship gun in the casino, which I brought back.
is it inside the casino?
It's outside.
It's outside.
It's outside. Yeah, this is funny because we were looking up, I just asked them, do you know what it is?
Yeah, if you know, if you're driving around here now, it says sand
Sand.
on that thing. Yeah, that's one of the things that survived. Yeah. And you know, I have a hard time with the sands. You know, like it's okay. Well, it's like gambling. I have a hard time with that. But it's like okay, they say something. But the thing that of converting, taking this like industrial, really cool thing and putting this like big sand on it, it's just.
And the trouble that they went through to mount that,
Yeah.
have you seen the pillars?
Yeah.
They are huge. They are very, very heavy. Just to, you know,
So.
I was telling somebody, I remember when that actually worked. Back and forth going on, you know.
Well, before the leave here, I want to bring up a little thing from Bethlehem Steel history for those aware of. This building was a killer, and for some reason, more men died in this building because it was gas leaks. They used furnace gas for heat treatment, and there was this famous story right in 1949 when 8 men died. One person went to check on something, then the person went to check on him, the third person went to check on him, fourth person to check on him, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth. So finally somebody stopped and said, wait a minute, there's something wrong. So one of the things we had to deal with all the time before we shot, because this is one of the great safety revolutions, we had gas checkers. We had people who came out from Bethlehem Steel with suitcase size, very sensitive instruments to make sure we were not going into a place, confined space where we had furnace gas, carbon monoxide.
The gas stays, hangs.
They were in the bottom of the building.
So you would think the windows could be open and it's not safe in here. So yeah, I have to be careful. And they had, you know, as an operating plant, they had a lot of safety procedures. As people, they learned that you had to really be safe, or you have some serious problems. Yeah, that's still there. Yeah. Okay, I think we're moving down. Sort of knew where it was going to be. I knew this thing was going to come up here. They pulled it in there. They held it for a minute. And Henry, we mentioned, my colleague Henry Smith, triggered a flash over here that caught all that silver metal, so it sort of pops it out. That's not that big. That gets
I would like to add that some of the text that you have is from artists from the book. We are more concerned, and we thought that we need a little bit more a different flavor to the exhibit, because I think some of the way that he presented the drawing is so good, so they are visual too. So,
Yeah, well, I think text, I mean, one of the things I like to do is read. And I like to read because of how things are described verbally. It's like, I just love to read, like I like to read like Middlemarch, you know, like George Elliot, like the way those towns are described in such detail, and it's fascinating. So to me, photographing and reading have this, at least a kind of photography I'm doing, has the same goal as the literature. was we had done a lot of work prior to that. We were sort of coming to the end. We knew the place was closing down, and I sort of wanted to get that sort of the end. So this is the last night that blast furnaces were running. This is in '95. This is the last night the Coke Works was running in '97. It ran a little bit longer. So on those 2 last nights, I went there. Now at that point, I just said, I'm tired of getting permission. You know, I'm just going to go there. You know, so you can drive right up along the river if you know the road, to sneak along the side. And I just went by myself with a smaller camera, and I walked in there. And the guys who were running the blast furnaces, maybe only 3, 4 people there. And he said, "Go for it." You know, like they didn't really. You know, at that point, it's all over. So I had already documented it carefully. You know, there's plenty of pictures of the blast furnace. This was more like, well, it's the atmosphere. So it's raining. This is like where I'm in there at midnight. It's raining, and I said, okay, I'm gonna take a picture. It's raining. I can't stop the rain. So I sort of climbed up in there and stood like underneath one of these pipes so the rain wouldn't get on the camera, and just shot it. You know, so that's the last night at the blast furnace. 2 years later, the Coke Works. Now, Coke Works should never have lasted as long as it did. You know, I mean, Coke Works are horrible. You know, they produce all this. Like, you can run a good Coke Works, right? You can do an environmentally sound Coke Works.
You can't get a license to build one in America.
But you cannot. Yeah, they're so bad. You know, but they're so kind of strange, and you know,
The world in themselves and the rest of the steel
plumes of steam coming up. Like if you don't understand what's going on, like it's so odd, but fascinating. So I had been there. I'd photographed it, done the whole thing. So I knew exactly where to go and stand to get the shot. So, you know, I drive up there again. It's like midnight or something, and climbed up and just kind of waited. You know, waited for that plume. And the sense of waiting. These are both maybe, you know, 5-10 minute exposures. So you're standing there and it's kind of neat when you do these long night pictures because it's like meditation. You're like, okay, the camera is meditating. And that's what else do I have to do? Besides stand there. And the other thing about night pictures is the latitude of the film, which is this response to the light, is so long. In other words, it has such compared to, say, digital, if you know anything about photography, the film latitude, the ability of the film to capture a range of tones in light, from light to dark, is much greater than a digital. The other thing that happens at night is the film loses sensitivity. So the longer you leave it open, the longer you can leave it open, and it doesn't get overexposed. So I just, after doing night pictures a long time, I just didn't even time it. You know, like with a clock, with a timer, I just counted, you know, 1001, 1002, 1003, and you count up, you know, 5001. You know, you're going on and you lose track. Like, oh, was it 6 minutes or 8 minutes? I don't know. I'll just add a couple more. You know, so these long night pictures have a really kind of wonderful, kind of meditative quality.
Question.
Yeah.
I lost a little piece when you said that when you were describing the film sensitivity, and you said the longer you leave it open, the longer you leave it open. Are you saying that the process is so slow that there's a margin of error that's substantial? Or are you saying that the chemistry changes when you're at longer periods?
The film itself changed chemically, or however, you know, the chemistry of the film itself changes the more it is exposed to light in a low light situation. Like in a daytime, you could easily overexpose it. But when you have these low amounts of light, where you're taking a long time to collect it, the film loses sensitivity.
Okay.
So you always want to give it more. More is better. That's sort of what I'm saying. And you can be, like I say, there's a lot of margin for error as long as you get to that sort of threshold where you've got enough. So if you got enough at 5 minutes, you could leave it for 10, and that's fine too. You know, so you always say, well, if I got 5, I might as well leave it for 10 just to be sure. You know, I didn't miss, because you don't want to miss, you know, the tiny little. Like this picture could be printed much lighter. Like if you printed this lighter, you'd see everything in here. So it's all there in the negative from that long exposure. So that's another thing I could say about a lot of these prints is you have to make a choice about how light or dark you want it to be. And it's not one or the other. It's like your kind of aesthetic or what your goal is in the picture. Determines how you're going to print it. So, and that's another nice thing about black and white film and these long exposures is you just put everything, you just expose the film, so you got so much information that then you can go ahead and print it in any way you want. Okay.
Okay,
Moving on.
moving on.
With your semi-nonchalant approach to 1, 2, 3, were you anywhere more precise with your development times, or was that? Or
I did not develop these myself. I had Ray Smicker do it,
okay.
and he pretty much used pretty much this. Well, he did some tests, you know, to see what worked.
Yeah, it does. I really enjoyed it. I actually have a little farm in there, and I go up there every year. Right next to the university, it's actually 12 miles of the crow flies from the university, but actually 25 miles driving. Way back in the Bethlehem Lake, 4,000 hours.
Yeah.
I think a traditional, or a more typical, I shouldn't say traditional, a more typical way of photographing workers in a working environment is like a portrait. It's like, okay, I'm the worker, I've got my stuff on, you know, it's a portrait of the worker. And you see, I actually did do that sometimes. I did take portraits of people, but mostly you don't see them in this exhibit because I felt like it wasn't really what I was trying to do. It didn't work for me, you know, it wasn't my kind of work. So mostly the people in my pictures are kind of these tiny figures embedded in this
I like all the signage.
big space. Yeah, yeah, the
It's like
signage.
interesting to see the.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Like I would never even
Yeah. Oh yeah, just,
Really?
yeah, right.
That's happening.
No, it's like, yeah, you read these signs and it's
Yeah.
like so cool, like it's so strange. You know, how do they, you
It's
know?
like reminiscent of a different era.
Yeah, yeah, and we've gone through other, you know, you go through abandoned places and people, you know, you want to take the sign, but it'll say, danger, 500,000 volts, you know. So the signs are great. Yeah. So maybe this is kind of the end of, you know, what we need to say. This is another one I guess I could, this is another one I could say that's kind of evocative to me. It was, again, after the place closed down. When a place like that closes down, it's so big that it doesn't close down all at once. It sort of parts of it keep going. But at this point, they were stopped. They are not doing anything more with iron. These are the big cars, railroad cars that carried the liquid iron, moved it around. So they're parked there. The snow, it was snowing. This is the sky, open sky. There was still a light on, and there was still some steam in the pipes. So you had this sense of, it's just, people just left it just a little while ago. They left it behind. And I was, you know, it's another one where I just kind of like went in on my own. But it's, I guess another thing is, it's interesting to see the way Ricardo has positioned all these pictures next to each other, because a lot of them have, there's the group of the type that has the glowing light, you know, the glowing light in the darkness. And so that's kind of, you know, the hot metal.
Joe, before you leave, you got to tell them the story of the Christmas tree in our
yeah.
photograph.
One of the, if you look carefully here, there's a Christmas tree in this, on top of this little shed. This is another thing I really regret, is that there were many, you know, in a giant place like this, the guys who work there have to have a refuge, have to have a little welfare, a little place to eat their lunch, a bathroom, a little office, a place they can talk on the phone because it's so noisy. So there were all these little rooms and little spaces that people used, and they had actually brought their own stuff in, their own couches, refrigerators. You know, there's a shot we have that is not a very good photograph, so it's not in here. But there's a shot of the guys who run this place, and they have their whole kitchen. They're eating breakfast. They have like the eggs and the toast and, you know, everything. They're all sitting there. I just didn't do enough of that, you know. But this is one example, and the Christmas tree, of course, is their own decoration. Now, when we were officially photographing in there, we had to give all the negatives to the steel company, you know, manager guy to look at before we could keep them, because he wanted to be sure that there wasn't anything that would make them look bad or, you know, show some violation of EPA or OSHA. So I gave him, I had shot this in color, this color transparency, the same shot. And you know, he's looking through all the stuff, and he finds the one in color, and he's, what's that Christmas tree doing in there? You know, it's like, it's just, it makes us look, you know, bad. So he kept it. He trashed it. I never saw it again. But fortunately, he couldn't. He was looking at the negatives. He couldn't see that this was a tree in the negative. So we got that one away. But yeah, the other anecdote I have to tell you about the guys checking. We didn't lose very many pictures. They gave them almost all to us. There was one beautiful photograph of these guys working, the workers in a shop. They were standing posing for me, and great. But the guy is these are 4x5 negatives. They're this big. So this guy named Larry is the guy who was looking through them, and he had a magnifier. You know, he's like, oh, there's a ring on that guy's finger. That's a safety violation, which is true. Like, you don't want a ring on your hand if you're running a lathe or a machine. You know, it's because it'll rip your finger off. So it's reasonable. But that one little ring meant that I lost that picture. But the other one is looking bad. You know, of course, they never wanted to see smoke in a picture. Like in the old days, if you saw smoke, that was a good thing because it meant the factory was running and everybody was working. Now smoke is a bad thing. So fortunately, we didn't have too many pictures with smoke belching out of chimneys, so that wasn't a problem. But there was one picture we shot up in that high house where we got stuck, where there was a door in a brick wall, just kind of off to the side. And the guys there had written in chalk, "Dog fucking chamber." So I'm sitting there with the guy looking through the stuff, and he takes his scissor and he cuts that door out. And hands me the one, hands me the picture with the empty spot in it. So, of course, then the next day, the next time we were there, we go back, oh, I guess we got to reshoot this. They had painted the door, so you had this like dingy, dusty, rusty place with this brand new black shiny door.
The Cold War, Bethlehem.
So anyway, I guess on that note, that's
There's an important thing for you.
that was our. If you have any other questions, you know, any.
When you were looking at these different workrooms, did you have the sense that many of these were, when they were going full blast, they were teaming with workers, or were there pockets of workers?
Mostly, yeah, you had the sense that there had been teaming workers years ago, but there was really no place we went that had more than a handful at the time we were there. And I think that was part because they had just closed so much down, but in part, the processes that were still running were so mechanized you could be doing it with a few people. Like one of these giant blast furnaces that maybe only had 3 people running it at any one time. So yeah, you had this, that was the other sort of operatic or sort of theatrical qualities. Like you felt like these were sets where all this activity had occurred some time ago and the people now were gone. They're mostly gone.
At its peak, Bethlehem Steel in World War I employed 38,000 people.
38,000.
At the Bethlehem plant.
Yeah.
Wow.
What about World War II?
World War II is a little less, around 35. They've already done some automation. World War I was Bethlehem's war because Bethlehem was seen as this great mythology in America to return our plowshares and swords to get going. Well, Bethlehem Steel was there when the first coming off. Charlie Schwab, the chairman and the president of Paul Johnson, got on Lusitania, not the voice of saying, got on Lusitania, got to New York, met Winston Churchill, and came back within 2 weeks of the first shot going off the British being involved with over $1 billion in orders. So they were, it was a lot of the, during the 2030s, about 2/3 of the plant that actually made this stuff was actually shut down because of the naval treaties. We didn't build ships from, it's very few from Cabot Blue, which is FDR came in and FDR put warships back in production and got them on hold. The stuff, no industry would do that today. No industry would do it today. If you can't make money with it next quarter, they scrap it. But Bethlehem Steel, for the national good, basically mothballed the whole armor and making operation because of the Washington and London naval arms treaties.
Okay.
Well, Joe, we want to thank you, you know.
You know, Lance has been with us from day one. Well, Ricardo has been with us, you know, supporting what I've been doing for a long time. And early on, acquired some photos, started showing the photos. Then he gave us a beautiful show just after, about a year after, it was in '98.
The end of the era, yeah.
Yeah, of big prints over in the main gallery.
Yeah.
And now he has really made this great contribution by acquiring this whole set for the collection and to then put some money toward the book that's going to be coming out. So I really have to thank Ricardo for his long-term, you know,
But I thank
great
you
support.
for that long term. You have been terrific, and your work is amazing.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Working with Joe and Henry was a joy. That's one word I can actually say it was a joy because we were all on the same wavelength and we all were willing to take chances and we were all wanting to learn at the same time. So we just had a blast. I mean, it was really, it was a fun project.
Okay. See ya.
Yeah, by the way, if anybody want a poster, please help yourself. You know, they have, we have, you know, I got the, yeah, that's good. One more? Okay. You know, you got these, do you want more?
No, that's fine.
You sure?
Yeah.
Do you want more?
I have a lot of
Digital photography.
Yeah. Yeah, well, thanks for coming. It's not digital, but, you know, I have a show, I just had a show over Muhlenberg as well. That I did print it all digital, it just went down. Remember?
The kids were
But, it,
I don't think I want to drive
Okay.
Well, we can also be a good place for future activity.
Where are you from? Well, I live in Arlington.
I did my graduate work at UC and I do film studies for 8 years before coming here.
What digital? I taught multimedia and video. And I teach digital imaging. I was mostly the Photoshop person. Chief photographer.
They have some production. The students all look great. You know, we definitely have an opportunity to do that. But we can't really compete with filmmaking in school, so I think the idea is that our strength